He was part of the sidewalk that morning, head resting on a battered canvas bag, knees drawn close, as if holding something in. He didn't ask for money. Didn't speak. Just sat quietly beside the brick wall outside the bank, like he had always been there. Why did people pass so quickly, eyes down? Who was this man they refused to see? Not every hero has a statue. Some just need their name spoken one last time. If that makes sense to you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to American Quiet Courage. A bank manager noticed him again. Second morning this week. No trouble, just still. They called building security. The guard approached, firm voice, practiced tone. The man didn't move. His hand gently pulled the canvas bag closer. The zipper made a soft sound. That's all. He didn't resist when they warned him. Didn't argue when they raised the taser. Just one jolt. A crackle. A thud. He collapsed sideways. The crowd froze. No one helped. And on the pavement beside him, the bag's flap opened, revealing the edge of an old, folded flag. No one asked his name. But someone should have. The paramedics arrived in under 4 minutes. No sirens. No rush. Just a quiet sense of procedure. The man on the sidewalk, Taser Galloway, as the worn ID in his pocket would later confirm, hadn't moved since he fell. His hand still clutched the strap of his bag, fingers curled like they were holding on to something more than canvas. A crowd had gathered by then, but no one spoke. A woman with a grocery tote held it tighter to her side. A man in a business suit looked at his phone, then away. And a teenager in a hoodie filmed from across the street, until an older man walked by and lowered the boy's phone without saying a word. Inside the ambulance, Thomas's breathing was shallow, but steady. One of the EMTs, a young man no older than 30, gently loosened the bag from his grip. "You can let go now, sir," he said softly, not expecting a response. But when he lifted the bag, something caught his eye, a small, round pin, half-tucked under a flap. Tarnished gold, the emblem unmistakable, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. The EMT paused. He looked down at the man on the stretcher. Sunken eyes. Hollow cheeks. A face the world had passed by. And yet, this wasn't just another call. He didn't say anything to his partner. Just slid the bag back beside the man, where it had been. Carefully. Almost with reverence. As they pulled away from the curb, no one clapped. No one saluted. The city kept moving. But in the back of that ambulance, something unspoken shifted. It was quiet. But not empty. The emergency room at Arlington General wasn't busy that morning. Just a couple of folks waiting on test results, a nurse wheeling in a tray, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. They brought Thomas Galloway in without commotion. No police escort. No questions asked. He was placed in Bay 3, curtained off, quiet, overlooked like he had been outside. The admitting nurse noted his vitals, logged transient mail, unresponsive, and moved on. That might have been the end of it, just another name lost in the system. But the young EMT, the one who had noticed the Marine pin, didn't leave right away. He stood at the edge of the room, phone in hand, thumb hesitating over the screen. Then he stepped outside and made a call, not to the press, not to the police, but to a number passed down from an uncle who'd served in the Corps. It wasn't on any website. No prompt when the line picked up. Just a calm voice on the other end. "I have a name," the EMT said quietly. "Thomas Galloway. Arlington General. He's not well." There was a pause. Then, understood. 7 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up behind the ambulance bay. No flashing lights. No insignias. The passenger door opened and a man in full military dress stepped out, eyes scanning, posture firm. He didn't head for the front desk. He didn't ask for permission. He walked straight into the ER and stopped at Bay 3, where an old Marine lay without rank, without medals, without fanfare. The officer didn't speak. He just stood there. Then, slowly, placed his hand over his heart. Because some codes don't need to be written down to be followed. Some names don't need to be famous to be honored. The room they moved him to wasn't much. No windows. A soft beep from the monitor. Faint antiseptic in the air. Thomas Galloway lay still, his chest rising slow and steady beneath a hospital blanket. His bag, weathered and quiet, sat on the chair beside him, untouched. The officer who had arrived didn't give a name. He just sat down beside the bed and took off his gloves. Every now and then, he'd glance at the chart. But mostly, he just looked at the man in front of him. Not for signs of recognition. Just to be present. A nurse came in to check vitals. Young, kind-eyed, maybe 25. She glanced at the uniform, then at Thomas. "Family?" she asked. The officer shook his head. "Maureen." She nodded once. Said nothing more. Thomas's hand moved just slightly. A twitch. Maybe instinct. Maybe something deeper. His fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, then stilled again. The officer leaned forward, voice steady and low. "You're not alone, Sergeant. You were seen." No response. But something in the room changed. As if the air itself had settled into attention. Outside the room, no one paid much mind. It was just another hospital hallway, just another old man under observation. But inside, there was no noise. No medal. No folded flag. Just a man who had lived quietly, and was now being honored in the same way. He hadn't asked for anyone. Hadn't given a number. Hadn't named a friend. No emergency contact. But somehow, someone had come. And in that silence, in that stillness, was a kind of dignity you can't request. A kind you earn. No trumpet. No salute. Just presence. And that was enough. The officer stayed for a while, long enough for the nurses to stop glancing through the curtain every few minutes. He didn't speak again. Just kept his posture steady, his presence quiet. When the shift changed, a nurse in her 40s came in with fresh linens and a clipboard tucked under one arm. She gave a quick look to the uniform, then to the man lying motionless beneath the pale blue sheet. "Any change?" she asked softly. The officer stood. Shook his head. Still resting. She nodded, adjusted the blanket near Thomas's shoulder, and gently tapped the 4 line. You served with him? No, ma'am, the officer said. But I served because of men like him. There was no further conversation. Just the small sounds of care, fabric being straightened, metal softly clinking, shoes against tile. The room didn't know rank. There were no stripes here. No chain of command. Only skin, bone, memory, and time. A volunteer stepped in later with a small radio. Helps the older patients rest, she said. She left it on the windowsill, even though the blinds were drawn. A faint melody drifted out, an old tune from the 60s, something slow, almost forgotten. Thomas didn't move. But his fingers barely twitched against the edge of the sheet. No one pointed it out. No one turned up the volume. They just let the music stay there, part of the room now. The officer eventually stepped out, leaving his card on the tray beside the bed. If he wakes, he told the nurse, let him know he wasn't invisible. Then he walked away. No handshake. No briefing. Just footsteps down the hallway, fading quiet. Inside, the radio kept playing. And Thomas Galloway lay still, but not alone. Mid-morning turned into early afternoon, and the quiet room in the back corner of Arlington General stayed much the same. Nurses came and went. Monitors blinked in a slow, predictable rhythm. And Thomas Galloway, still and pale beneath the soft light, hadn't opened his eyes. But someone else came. She arrived alone. No uniform. No urgency. Just a plain green sweater, denim jeans, and a folder clutched tightly to her chest. She paused at the front desk, gave her name softly, then followed the directions down the hall to Bay 3. When she reached the curtain, she didn't walk in right away. She stood there for a moment, listening. The faint buzz of the machines. The low hum of the radio playing an old song she hadn't heard since childhood. Then, with one slow breath, she pulled the curtain aside. Mr. Galloway, she asked. He didn't stir. She stepped in anyway and placed the folder on the tray. Sat down in the chair beside his bed, hands folded carefully in her lap. My name is Rachel Hart. I work at the VA records office. We got a call. Her voice was steady, but quiet. We weren't sure at first. So many names, some without photos. But your file came up, sir. There's a note here from a captain. From a long time ago. It said, if ever located, this man is to be shown every courtesy available. No questions. No delay. She paused. Looked at him. Looked at the bag beside the bed. I guess someone remembered. A nurse peeked through the curtain, checking silently. Then nodded and stepped back. Rachel reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She didn't read it aloud. Just placed it gently on the bedside table. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth. It was a pin. A fresh Marine Corps emblem. Not polished. Not boxed. Just offered. She placed it near the old one, tucked in the flap of his worn bag. Then sat back down. You're not forgotten, Mr. Galloway, she whispered. Not anymore. She didn't stay long. Just enough. When she left, the folder remained. The curtain drifted slightly in her wake. And in the stillness of that hospital room, the silence didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The next morning, the hallway outside Bay 3 was unusually still. Nurses kept their voices low. No one rushed past. There was a sense that something, though unannounced, was about to happen. At exactly 9 o'clock, a group of men arrived through the side entrance. 7 of them. Each wearing civilian clothes, simple and quiet, but the way they stood made it obvious they were military. Retired, maybe. Still carrying that posture that never really leaves. They didn't speak. They didn't ask for directions. They already knew where to go. One by one, they stepped into the room. The first man paused at the foot of the bed. He looked down at Thomas Galloway, lying still beneath the sheet, and gave the faintest nod. Not of pity. Not of sadness. Just recognition. The others followed. They formed a straight line near the wall, shoulder to shoulder, feet set. No fanfare. No commander. Just the quiet rhythm of shared memory. Then, without a signal, every man raised his hand to his brow. A salute. Not for show. Not for anyone watching. For him. For the man who never asked to be remembered, and yet was. The silence in the room was deeper than before, but not empty. It was filled with presence, with respect that didn't need words. They held their salute for a full 10 seconds. Then lowered their hands. Turned. And walked out. Not one of them looked back. Because in their world, that moment had already said everything. By evening, the light in the room had softened. One lamp glowed in the corner, casting long shadows across the tile. The radio still played, faint as a whisper, barely more than breath. Thomas Galloway hadn't spoken. Hadn't opened his eyes. But he was still there. And somehow, that meant something to everyone who stepped into that room. A nurse came in with a clipboard. Her shift was ending, and she paused longer than usual at the foot of the bed. She didn't take vitals. Just looked. Then reached down and gently adjusted the old canvas bag, making sure it hadn't slipped too far off the chair. As she did, her hand brushed the zipper. And it moved, just slightly. Enough to make that quiet, familiar sound. The same one they'd heard on the sidewalk. The same one the EMT had noticed. The sound of something closing, but never quite shutting all the way. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. But everyone in the room looked up. Later that night, a staff member turned off the radio. Folded the extra blanket. Turned out the lamp. And stood still for a moment before leaving. No alarms had sounded. No final words were spoken. But somehow, they all knew. The room was empty now. But not silent. Because some sounds linger. And long after the footsteps faded. After the lights were dimmed. And after the file was closed. The zipper sound remained. Some stories don't need to shout to be remembered. The quiet ones, the ones that unfold in silence, in hospital corners, on city sidewalks, often carry the deepest weight. Thomas R. Galloway never asked for honor. He didn't wear his medals, didn't raise his voice. But his life still spoke, in the way people showed up. A young EMT who paused. A Marine officer who stood in silence. A woman who brought a record from decades ago. 7 men who saluted with no audience. The lesson is simple, yet powerful. Dignity doesn't depend on status, only on how we choose to see each other. Recognition doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, it's just a hand on a shoulder. A folded pin. A zipper sound that lingers. And maybe, that's enough. How many Thomases have we walked past, unaware? How many quiet lives have gone unseen because no one stopped long enough to look? If this story moved you even just a little, share it with someone who still believes in respect, in service, and in remembering the ones who never asked to be remembered. And if you believe that courage can be quiet, please like, share, and subscribe to American Quiet Courage. Because sometimes, silence needs a voice.